Canada is in a much darker place than most people realize. I think it's a lack of knowledge, but it's also there's a psychological element with the denial of it. We don't want to admit or accept that we are much further down the slide towards authoritarianism than is certainly comfortable to wrestle with. So that's the first thing is we need to stop remaining willfully ignorant, and we need to stop being in denial and recognize that Canada's in a very, very dark place. Now, if you're a fan of communism, if you think authoritarianism is good, then you would disagree with what I just said. You would say Canada's in a great place, right? The more control that the state has over all these terrible people that believe these backwater things and all these stupid conspiracy theorists that spread all this misinformation. I mean, if you think that way, then you're obviously going to disagree with me. You're going to say Canada's in a great place, right? The state has more power than ever to make this place better for people, right? Well, I mean, obviously that's ignorant of history, right? Anytime we give a lot of power to the state to implement some sort of utopia, what we got was a dystopia, right? 100 million people were murdered in the 20th century by other human beings who wanted, through force, to implement what they thought was a better world, right? Whether it's a workers' paradise, whether it's a China that's advanced, whether it's a nation that's racially pure, right? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then when you're finished watching this video, start learning some history, because you will repeat the evils of history if you don't learn it. History is not memorizing that 6 million Jews were murdered. It's learning about how we let that happen, about how millions of sophisticated, educated, intelligent Germans let that happen. That's history. That's how you figure out that history can repeat itself, right? People are going to be murdered and have their livelihoods destroyed and have their rights taken away and have their families broken up in this country if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past and try to avoid repeating them, right? So Canada's in a dark place. I think for a rough analogy, I might put it to sort of mid to late 1930s as a rough analogy. If 0 is a free society and 100 is a complete totalitarian dystopia, like Brave New World or 1984, then we're probably around 75. That's where we are. We are more than halfway there, right? Canada was a pretty good free nation. You go back to 1950, 55, 60, the Diefenbaker era, right? 1960s when the Canadian Bill of Rights came in. You look back at how free that nation was. It's unrecognizable today, right? If that was on the scale, that was 5. We were almost there to being pretty much as good as a society can get this side of heaven. Well, we've gone from 5 to 75 in less than that many years. So yeah, how did we get here? Well, I mean, obviously that's difficult to unpack quickly, but probably the biggest thing is culture, right? If you, because you can have all of these wonderful laws and these institutions and these justice systems. You can have all these things in place, but if the culture rejects those things, they will crumble, right? So, why is Canada less free than the United States, generally speaking, right? Is it because our institutions are inferior? Maybe a little bit, but not really a lot. Is our Constitution inferior? Yes, obviously, but it's decent. Right? We have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We have this heritage of freedom on a legal level in this country. So why are we so less free? Well, I think I would say it's because of culture, right? There are more people that understand and care about freedom in the United States than in Canada. So on a cultural level, right, you still have 40, 50, maybe even 60% of the population that understands freedom, that defends it, that speaks out about it, that lives it, that fights for it. And so they retain it, notwithstanding the corruption that's in their institutions, right? Which is everywhere. That's every human institution has got a level of corruption in it. So in Canada, it's a cultural thing. We do not have a cultural love of freedom. So at this people level, at this cultural level, we have abandoned it, embraced socialism and statism and collective rights at the cost of individual liberty, because we have been fooled into thinking that this is going to somehow make a better world, right? I mean, why did the Venezuelans embrace it in the 90s? They thought this will be a better world. It'll be a better Venezuela, right? We'll embrace socialism. Let's get rid of this awful, cutthroat, harsh capitalism. Let's embrace this lovey, touchy, feely, goody socialism, right? And now they're eating their dogs. It's the same thing in Canada. We didn't go as fast, and it's not going to happen as fast here, where there's more resiliency, right? But it's the same idea of if we don't have a cultural love for freedom, then eventually all our institutions and all of our heritage and all of our laws and all of our traditions of liberty, they will all crumble under the weight of a culture that has rejected them, right? Ontario, as a culture within a culture, has rejected freedom more than Alberta. So why is Alberta slightly better to be in the last year and a half of tyranny in the guise of public safety? Because there is a slightly better culture of freedom in Alberta than in Ontario, right? And for better or for worse, that's how a democracy works, right? The politics will follow the culture. And if the culture embraces socialism, well, obviously so will the politics. And that's what you see in Canada generally. And that's what you see on a microcosm level. That's what you see in Ontario compared to Alberta, right? So that's how we've gotten there, is our culture has become corrupted into the socialist mindset. And, nowadays that one of the phrases going around is freedom is selfish, right? Well, that arose out of a cultural mindset we have, a kind of a cultural perspective towards freedom. And so if we're ever going to stop the slide into authoritarianism, the culture is going to have to change. But if the culture doesn't love freedom enough, we will lose it. And so that's how we got there. That's where we're at, and that's also where we're going, right? So what do we do about it? Well, obviously it's difficult to change the culture. How do you do that? But where you start on an individual level is, again, speaking truth, discussing ideas. Don't just talk about the weather. I know it's uncomfortable and difficult to talk about ideas at the dinner table, but ideas are life and death. Don't you think that's important enough to have some awkward conversations about? What you believe determines what you do. If you believe bad ideas, you will do bad things. And you won't recognize them for bad things. You'll think they're good because your ideas are so bad and your thinking is so poor that now you can't even tell the difference between good and bad. Bible talks about this, right? In the end days, we will label good bad and bad good. That comes from a lack of wisdom and a lack of critical thinking, right? To be able to identify good for the good that it is and evil for the evil that it is requires thinking about ideas and reasoning and growing your wisdom over years of doing that. And that's how you keep yourself on the straight and narrow and influence those around you is by not just privately living those truths, but to actually talk about it, to bring it into the public sphere, to bring it into the relational sphere with people you know, people you talk with, right? I have American in-laws, and when I go down there for American holidays, it's a very cultural thing. I notice at the dinner table the appetite to discuss uncomfortable, difficult intellectual things. That appetite is very much lacking in Canada. And we're seeing the natural, inevitable outcome of that in the fact that liberty is dying in this nation. So, obviously we want to change it at the political level, but we need to start engaging it at the cultural level, or it doesn't matter what we try to do at the political level, right? Because politics is just a manifestation of where your culture is at. Right? Culture is going to determine if enough people vote for a politician or a party that advocates for freedom or one that advocates for more state control.